Well, welcome to all who are joining us today. This week, we're talking about a new way of seeing, specifically a new way of seeing our church's mission and vision. Now, if you use the one-year Bible, this week we began reading the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Isaiah is a wonderful book filled with many inspiring passages, and perhaps one of the best known is found in chapter 6, where Isaiah describes his vision and his call. Listen to how he talks about it. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he'd taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And whom will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. Among the many things that can be noted about this passage is the way in which the account begins. In the year that King Uzziah died. The backstory to this text is that Uzziah had been one of the more successful kings in ancient Judah. Under his reign, the people of Judah had experienced an era of peace and prosperity. Life was good under King Uzziah. And yet the way this text begins suggests that this era of goodness, this time of prosperity and success, it had to end to enable Isaiah to fully and clearly see God's plan for him and God's vision for his future. 188 years ago, McLean Church was founded by a group of area residents who saw the need for a church in this region. You can read the minutes of the very first meeting of our church on the placard behind the bell in our Edinburgh Buildings hub. Since that day of our founding, on December 7th of 1838, many things have come and gone. Many things have started and stopped. Many things have been born and many things have died. But the mission of McLean Church has remained the same, helping people see and follow Jesus Christ. About 30 years ago, we began to articulate that mission with the succinct statement, we eliminate barriers to give people access to Christ. With our mission clearly articulated as eliminating barriers to give people access to Christ, the strategic question became, what are the barriers that keep people from accessing the Christ we love and follow? 3 decades ago, the answer to that question was quite clear. The barriers all had to do with attraction. 30 years ago, most people living in the United States had some spiritual tradition with which they were raised. And for most people, that tradition was Christianity. That tradition involved the church. And although many people who had been raised in that tradition were not attending or actively involved in the church, most people still possessed an awareness of the church's importance and value. Often they would say things like, I know I should come to church, but the importance of the church and the person of Jesus Christ was recognized largely, even if the church was not being engaged in or if Christ even was not being followed. The challenge and the opportunity that existed 30 years ago was to make the church relevant and attractive to people again. Our strategy was to make the church so exciting and compelling to people that they couldn't resist attending. So in the early 1990s, we set out to eliminate what came to be called the attraction barrier. New styles of music, dynamic programming, relevant teaching, coffee and donuts. These seemingly simple changes made the church attractive again to a culture that was still aware of the value of the church and that still, by and large, wanted to follow the pathway to a rich and full life offered in the person and teachings of Jesus. And you know what? It worked. The decades of the 90s and early 2000s saw people to return to the church in droves. Not just to our church, but to many churches across our region and country who, like us, were seeking to make church attractive to a culture who still valued and understood the importance of the church, but who had become disengaged and disconnected from it. In our own experience here at McLean Church, we went from fewer than 50 people attending worship in 1991 to well over 1,500 people in 3 different locations regularly calling McLean Church their home. Many of us attend McLean Church today because church was made attractive to us again. This attraction strategy that we pursued for 3+ decades, it was successful. It worked. Thanks be to God. But you know, about 10 years ago, we began to sense that this strategy was no longer working as effectively as it once did. There was a growing feeling that the barriers that were keeping people from Christ, they were changing. The issue was no longer simply about attraction. There was something much bigger going on. It seemed in many ways like a whole way of approaching life, a whole way of viewing institutions like the church was changing. It was dying. It was no longer that people valued the church but just weren't attending. It was now that people no longer understood the value, relevance, or function of the church, or the meaning and value of the Christ whom the church embodied. A much different strategy than simply making the church attractive was needed. But we didn't know what that new strategy was. And that left us intently, eagerly, frantically searching for ways over the last 10 years to live out our mission in this new era. And the last 5 years, shaped largely by the pandemic, it added a new urgency, a new desperation to that search. Like Isaiah, we were experiencing the death of something that had been secure and successful. And yet a new vision wasn't at all clear. However, as with Isaiah, the ending of the old was setting the stage for something new. And so today, I want to describe for you a renewed mission and a refined vision. First, our mission. We eliminate barriers to give people access to Christ. Our mission has always been centered on Jesus Christ. To be a Christian is to be a follower of Jesus Christ. It means that we understand that the way and model of life Jesus revealed is a pathway to life at its best, life at its fullest. Jesus shows us the path to what he described as eternal life. Our goal has always been to make that life as accessible and understandable as possible. What are the barriers today that keep people from this life? Well, I'd suggest to you that the barriers have primarily to do with awareness. People are no longer aware of the value and role the church can play in helping them access the fullness of life that Christ offers. Now, please note this very important cultural shift. 30 years ago, people understood the value and role of the church. They just weren't attracted to it. Today, people, even those who identify as Christians, largely do not understand or are not aware of the value and role that the church plays. Now, we can lament that reality all we want to, or we can simply embrace it and address it. And we've chosen to do the latter. So the question becomes, how do we make people aware of the value and role of the church, which in reality is the question, how do we make people aware of the value and role of Jesus Christ? To do that, I propose that we need a new way of seeing, a new way of seeing the work of the church. For people to be aware of Christ, for people to have access to the Christ we love and serve, people first need to see Christ. Christ needs to be seen. How is Christ seen? Well, Christ is seen through Christ's people. Christ is seen through the church being the body of Christ, the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. How does the church do that? Well, it does that by doing the things Jesus did. What did Jesus do? He met the needs of the people he encountered. He resourced the community he resided in and with. Whether it was healing the sick or raising the dead, teaching people to think about life differently, or simply noticing the unnoticeable. Jesus was in the business of responding to the needs of his community and resourcing the people with whom he lived. Now, churches have always understood this. Churches have always recognized that their mission in the world was to love their neighbor by responding to the needs around them. But each church does this a bit differently. Each church has its own unique way, its own unique calling for how Christ is to be embodied in their service to others. For McLean Church, the unique way in which we have always done this is by providing resources our community needs that no one else is able or willing to provide. Christ is seen through McLean Church both in the resources we provide and in the way in which we provide them. Christ is seen through the community resources that the church provides. A simple example, and there are many, why do we open our buildings each year for school and community events, even if it requires us to displace or cancel our regular church activities? Well, it's because our buildings and facilities are resources our community needs. And by providing them to our community in the way and with the Spirit we do, we believe Christ is revealed. We believe Christ is seen. We believe people become aware of Christ. And if you don't believe that, all you need to do is listen to or read the steady stream of comments we receive from our community about how the people of McLean Church, in kind, generous, loving, patient, and accommodating ways, have met the needs of the community around us. Jesus, just like Jesus met the needs of the people around Him. As we work to be the good in our community, the ultimate good, Jesus Christ is revealed. Christ needs to be seen, and He is seen through the community resources our church provides. If our culture is going to become aware of Christ, then this is imperative. The way we at McLean Church make Christ visible is through the community resources we provide and the way in which we provide those resources. But this is only part of the equation. For seeing Christ matters little if one does not have a pathway to Christ. It's not good enough to simply see the destination. We have to have a map to get us where we want to go. Christ not only needs to be seen, but Christ needs to be accessed. The map we have provided to our community for almost 200 years, by which people access the reality of Christ, is the spiritual practices and traditions that our church enables people to engage with. So, practices like weekly worship and small groups, traditions like baptism and communion, these all provide a map to help us get to our destination, or more accurately speaking, to help us become aware of the Christ who is around us. For the reality of Christ is appropriated in our lives through the practices and traditions the church helps us engage in. Now, look for a moment at what we've created, and let's try it a bit fresh. Christ needs accessed through spiritual traditions and practices. And Christ needs seen through community resources the church provides, and equally as important, the way in which the church provides those resources. These two things are two new lenses by which we look at the reality of our mission. This is the way we see our mission as the church. This is the set of glasses with which we currently see our work in our community. This is how we are eliminating barriers to give people access to Christ. We're enabling Christ to be seen by how we resource our community, and we're allowing Christ to be accessed through the spiritual practices and traditions we provide. The next week, I'm going to talk about specific projects and initiatives that we believe will help us achieve this renewed sense of our mission. But you begin to see and understand this new way of seeing, which is no longer simply about attraction, but is about something much deeper, awareness. Now, something else that has happened over the past 10 years. Our vision as a church has been refined. In the early 2000s, as we were preparing to move into our Edinburgh facility, we had a demographic study done of northwestern Pennsylvania. And one of the things that study looked at was the likelihood of people in this region attending church. The likelihood of people attending church. And that likelihood in northwestern Pennsylvania at that time, at least according to the study we had done, was quite low. So in the early 2000s, we said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could change that reality for this entire region? In other words, wouldn't it be amazing if we could make the church so attractive to people in places like Erie and Meadville and even as far away as Warren and Ashtabula, that we could transform an entire region? It was a noble vision. It was the right vision at the time. It's why we began congregations in Union City and Erie, and it's why we talked repeatedly about starting congregations in places like Warren and Meadville. But over the 2 decades since that vision was first articulated, something became increasingly obvious. And that is the places that we were having the greatest impact and the places where we were most meaningfully making a difference were not places like Erie and Meadville. They were places like McCain and Waterford, Cranesville and Cambridge Springs, Edinburgh and Union City. We were making a difference in a clearly defined corridor, what we began to call the Route 6 corridor. With Union City on the east and Albion on the west, and Edinburgh right in the middle. This corridor was our place. These were our people. And if you live in this corridor, as many of us do, you know the needs of this area are somewhat different from the needs of people living, say, in Erie or Mill Creek or Meadville. The needs of the Route 6 corridor, they're largely shaped by its more rural setting. And what's required to meet those needs is different from what is needed in a more urban or suburban environment. It's these unique needs and these people that our church seems especially equipped and positioned to serve. Now, this does not at all mean that we don't care for people outside of this corridor, or that if you don't live along Route 6, you're no longer welcome to be part of McLean Church. No, this is not true at all. All people have always been and always will be welcome at McLean Church. But it does mean, as we embark on this new era, we know where our focus primarily lies, and it is right here. And with this clear focus on the Route 6 corridor, next week I'm going to share how we are uniquely preparing to meet the needs of this specific region, in which most of us live and most of us love. Wouldn't it be amazing if at some point in the future people would gather to say, you know what, this stretch, this little chunk of northwestern Pennsylvania, it's different, it's better, because McLean Church was here. It's a new day. It's a new era. The old is passing and the new is dawning. When Isaiah saw the new, he was also confronted with a question. Listen again to the text. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I. Send me." As we stand on the verge of a new day, with a renewed mission and a refined vision, may we, like Isaiah, enthusiastically respond, "Here am I. Send me."